What's up, y'all? Let's talk about prison funding, detention centers, and where taxpayer dollars are actually going. Right now, the U.S. spends about $80 billion a year on the prison system, and most of that money is used for staff salaries, security, and the upkeep of the facilities, so operational costs. Very little of that is actually used for rehabilitative services like mental health and job training, which can actually stop the cycle of incarceration. Keep in mind that $80 billion is taxpayer money. That's public funding that the government receives in order to run these institutions. Now, of that $80 billion of public funding, the government uses about $3.5 billion for contracts with private prisons. Private prisons are for-profit institutions that hold about 8% of the U.S. prison population. They are designed to make money, not necessarily to help people rebuild their lives. Some of these private prison contracts also have quotas, which means the state will pay for a certain number of beds. And so in instances where the occupancy is low, taxpayer dollars are actually paying for empty beds. And really in general, we're all paying for these companies to keep people in prison, not to get them rehabilitated and back into society. Detention centers are a whole nother story. Whenever there's like a big immigration crackdown, funding for these detention centers skyrocket. A lot of these detention centers are run by private companies that also get paid whether the bed is filled or not. So our tax dollars are being given to these private companies instead of being invested in community programs that are going to support positive long-term outcomes. Despite all the money that's used to fund these prisons, very little of it actually impacts the living conditions of prisoners. Both public and private prisons have issues with overcrowding, inadequate health care, and limited access to educational and rehabilitative services. Private prisons are even worse because they are incentivized to minimize costs. This often results in even poorer living conditions for inmates. Studies have shown that these private institutions have less staff, less programs, and reduced healthcare services compared to public prisons. Why is that? To cut expenses to maximize profit. So even with all that money that we pay in taxes, it does not translate into better living conditions for inmates, and that's largely due to how the funds are allocated and prioritized across the prison system. So that's the tea on that. In part 2, we're going to talk about ways that we can change this.